friends, welcome back to my channel. This is Sandra and I make videos all about cybersecurity, work vlogs, as well as having a career in technology. And today we have a super fun video. So if you guys somehow have not heard about the Colonial Pipeline hack that went on recently, I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about this hack, who caused it, who was affected, and basically everything else that went on afterwards. And definitely let me know in the comments below if you like these kind of videos where I'm talking about different hacks or cybersecurity attacks. And please give this video a like if this was helpful to you. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of background. This cybersecurity attack was conducted by Darkside, which is a ransomware gang that is believed to be operating out of Russia. They have stated that they are not affiliated with the Russian government, so that is another thing to keep in mind. But of course, when we think about these large-scale attacks, we often do kind of think of them as nation-state attacks, where they are somehow or some way funded by a nation-state like Russia, Iran, China, etc. And the victim was Colonial Pipeline, which is a privately held company in the US that actually owns about 5,500 miles of the overall gas and diesel and fuel infrastructure on the east coast of the US. And a really big thing to note here is that Colonial Pipeline actually carries 45% of all the gas that circulates on the east coast of the US. So obviously if someone was able to hack into their infrastructure, they would very seriously halt the US economy, honestly, if this happened to go on for a longer period of time. But as of today's recording, which is Saturday, probably the day before you're watching this, and it's been about 4 days since the attack happened. And because this was a ransomware attack, honestly victims don't always have a choice behind what they can do to get their data back. And for those of you who may not know, a ransomware attack is basically when an attacker is able to get into your system and encrypt your files, and then they have the key to all of your files, and to you it's all encrypted, so you can't open your files, you can't get to your data, sometimes you can't even get into your applications. Basically everything on your network or on your infrastructure is locked down, and they basically have the key, which is basically some kind of code that can decrypt your data so you can get to it again. But usually attackers ask for a large sum of money to give this money back to you. Now this happens very commonly at a smaller scale, where oftentimes there's some kind of clickbait targeted at users if they click on it, and they might download some malicious code or malicious application that might have ransomware on it, and then maybe a few days later everything on their computer gets locked down, and then they have to call this number to get some kind of code, pay this amount of money, wire it, money order it somewhere, and then everything on their desktop or computer will get unlocked again. But oftentimes ransomware attackers have some kind of backdoor back into your system, so they're actually able to consistently lock down your computer every few months or so and ask you for another fee. So because ransomware attacks can be really difficult to get rid of, a lot of times people end up basically just factory resetting and erasing their whole computers to get it back to normal. Of course, they might not be able to keep all of your files, but it's better than having to pay someone a fee every few months or so to get your data. Now, of course, this will look very different for Colonial Pipeline, which is a company with $3.1 billion worth of assets that also made $1.3 billion in revenue last year. And if you're wondering about the outcome of the actual attack, well, the attackers did get their actual ransom. So Colonial Pipeline did agree to pay their attackers nearly $5 billion in digital currencies to basically recover their data. However, due to some of their infrastructure capabilities or lack of capabilities, it's actually taking longer than expected to actually decrypt everything. So with that much data to decrypt and cover, it'll actually take a few days for Colonial Pipeline to go back into BAU, or business as usual. And even as of now, 4 days after the attack, Colonial Pipeline has not released virtually any information about how the attack actually happened and how the company was breached. The company actually waited 4 days before even announcing that it was breached, which is a very long time in terms of cybersecurity attacks. But one of the main things that we know was that there was virtually no separation of duties with the data management and the actual operational technology under Colonial Pipeline. And just to give you an idea of what company infrastructures should be looking like in terms of their data and their operations, there should be at least some kind of check or firewall between every section of the network infrastructure in your company. Wherever you're hosting your data servers and your databases should not be the same as wherever you're hosting your actual operations technology. Usually companies only allow data to flow unidirectionally or one directional between the two entities, but in this case data was able to flow bidirectionally or both ways, which is actually how the ransomware spread throughout the company. Some industry professionals are saying that to install unidirectional functions and controls like that throughout a 5,500 mile pipeline can cost an absurd amount of money, or it is very time consuming and complicated. So that could be a reason why they didn't set up something like this in the first place. But of course there are others that say the cost of actually having to pay ransomware gangs like this one, or other even worse cybersecurity attacks that could be more devastating, like someone literally coming into your system and deleting all of your data, the cost of setting up those cybersecurity controls in place might actually be cheaper than the actual losses of having downtime in the operations of the pipeline. Also, not so surprisingly, government agencies have been doing simulated attacks from nation states like Russia or China, and basically seeing how the country could react to such a large scale attack. But in this case, the motive for the attack was actually very different from the simulations. Instead Instead of a nation state, this was a ransomware gang, and instead of the motive being trying to take down national infrastructure or disrupting the economy, Darkside literally conducted this attack for the money. Now, of course, these are based on sources, which by the way are linked below if you want to read more into it. Not saying that you can trust every word that a ransomware gang can say, but it's definitely something to keep note of when seeing and reading more about these attacks. Because even if you're working in your own company, in your cybersecurity team, if you're doing red team and blue team simulations, oftentimes there are the things that you don't really think about, and the motives and the actual routes of the attackers that you don't think about that actually hit you the hardest. And that is why it's so important to have diverse minds in cybersecurity, because there could be one thing that you're missing, one thing you're not thinking about. And in this case, it was very, very devastating for this company, as well as the East Coast in general, because many gas stations were out of gas. Gas prices went up. There were many, many people literally lined up outside of gas stations, filling up their tanks because people were really thinking that they would run out of gas. Now, of course, it's a valid fear, especially as a consumer and someone on the other side who doesn't know what's going on. And it's kind of like when people were saying there was a toilet paper shortage and everyone ran out and bought and hoarded more toilet paper because they heard there was a toilet paper shortage, which caused more of a shortage. Not to mention hand sanitizer, Lysol wipes and stuff like that, but that's definitely a whole nother conversation to have. And something else that is very alarming about this attack is that the Energy and Homeland Security departments conducted an assessment and found that the country could only afford about 3 to 5 days with Colonial Pipeline shut down before things like mass transit in major cities would have to shut down or limit operations because of a lack of diesel fuel. Chemical factories and refineries would also have to shut down because there is no pipeline to actually help them distribute their products. So obviously something like this was a very, very big problem for the US, and the Biden administration did reach out to Darkside and attempt to shut them down. And from the sources that I've read, their websites and blogs have actually been taken down. Who knows if it's temporary or permanent, but one major outcome is that the administration is actually going to be investing more money into cybersecurity initiatives, which I believe that any modern government or country is going to be in drastic need of more cybersecurity professionals, especially in the upcoming years. So with more and more companies being exposed through their weak infrastructures, their weak cybersecurity controls and processes, the world is going to look very, very different once more of the world comes online and there are more and more cybersecurity groups emerging like Darkside. Also, every time I say Darkside, I'm thinking about Superman's Darkside, like the villain. They're obviously very, very different. And before I get into the outcome of Darkside after the attack, Darkside basically calls himself a ransomware as a service company, or not company, gang. So that basically means that they have clients or customers that come to them and use their software to use against different victims. So these people basically work with Darkside and use their software to actually get into companies like Colonial Pipeline. They usually aim for companies with a good amount of net revenue so they can afford to pay back the money. And then once the payment is actually received from that company, Darkside gets a cut of that money, which is basically predetermined with the attacker and Darkside. And one thing that's really funny to note is that a lot of these bad guys or cybersecurity attack groups actually have a kind of like morals list where they basically won't attack things like hospitals, nonprofits, schools, the government sector, and anything related to funerals. It kind of reminds me of that quote from Harley Quinn where she was like, "We're bad guys, we're not bad people." And I just feel like this is kind of like the perfect example of this, but also, I mean, not saying that they're good guys, because obviously they are extorting money from companies and people. But also at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of companies and ransomware attackers and cyber group attackers were actually extorting and hacking into hospitals, and that was just not cool. And even the hacker group started saying, hey, we're not going to attack you if you're a hospital, and like just let us know and we'll give you back your money or your information or decrypt your data and stuff like that. Even hacker groups have morals, I guess, but it's definitely something to keep note of. But as of May 14th, which was Friday, Krebs on Security released an article. And if you don't already know Krebs on Security, it is the awesome security blog by Brian Krebs. And I've actually been reading this blog since I was a sophomore in college. So it's been about 5 years or so. But basically he is a very, very good writer, and he writes about all things cybersecurity attacks, hacks, and he also can go very technical, so you can definitely check that out if you guys are interested about reading more in-depth security news. But basically Darkside has announced that they are officially shut down because their servers, which were hosted in an undisclosed country, were seized and shut down, and someone actually drained all of the cryptocurrency that they had in an account to pay their affiliates, which is really funny that a ransomware gang has an affiliate program. But anyways, and something else that is really exciting that I mentioned earlier in the video was that the Biden administration did sign an executive order to improve cybersecurity in the US. Now there are a few things that this executive order has. I did link below an article that kind of states more details about what the actual executive order entails. But one of the main things that I feel like is so important is that it removes barriers to information sharing from government and private sectors. So I feel like this is so important because you have no idea how difficult it is to know things when you're just one company on the grid. And there are actually many companies maybe who are in the same sector, like if they're all in like healthcare or something, then maybe they'll have some kind of coalition where they might share data about potential breaches or attacks that might be smaller scale that they've seen that may be potentially exploited, that they share with each other from a very high level. However, of course, when it comes to the government, not a lot of that is shared. And there are also people who say that the government has a lot of zero-day attacks that aren't released yet into the wild because they don't want them to be exploited, or maybe they don't have the infrastructure set up to control them yet or prevent them yet. Of course, this may or may not be true, but one thing to note is that a lot of times when companies do get compromised, they often don't want to share the exact details of how it happened, because obviously there's reputational damage as well as just distrust of the overall company if consumers are trusting that company or the government with their data. But I do think that the more we know, the better we are equipped to protect and defend ourselves. So in my opinion, the more data sharing, the better, as long as it's, within bounds. I don't think you should be sharing every single thing about your infrastructure or anything like that, but just in terms of an attack and how it actually happened and got into your system, just so other companies or government entities could recreate that problem and try to prevent it. Obviously, that is the best case scenario for everyone, because if we look back at the SolarWinds breach, which if you guys don't already know was a very major breach that happened a few months ago that honestly companies are probably still fixing based on the findings from that attack, and I think we're still learning more, honestly. But you can see that it basically affected multiple third parties and companies, and it often ends up being that companies don't share these breaches until it gets out of hand or people's information actually gets leaked or something very major happens, which hopefully this executive order will help to improve. A few of the other goals in the executive order were to set up a cybersecurity safety review board, improve the overall security for software supply chains, creating a playbook for responding to cybersecurity incidents, which I believe is very, very major. Obviously, when this happened, the response from the company and the government is always key to how the country reacts, because obviously the news outlets are talking about people lining up at the gas stations, and that's going to cause panic in someone like me who's at home watching TV and thinking, oh shoot, I should go get gas. And you just see people with cartons in their trucks and then filling up gas, just like that toilet paper analogy I mentioned earlier. And just imagine that this wasn't just on the East Coast, but overall in the whole country. That would obviously cause a huge spike in gas prices, and that is just not a very good look. And for those of you who may not be aware, a playbook is kind of like a set of instructions or steps to follow when an incident happens. Usually companies set up playbooks for setting up processes. So if I was onboarding someone or training someone, I would set up a playbook for that. Or if your team or company was very well documented, you could even write a playbook for your job and your role and how you do it. So if you were documenting metrics, or if you were managing a process or managing a project, the playbook is kind of the steps that you would follow and give to someone else who might be taking over your role, or someone who you might be trying to explain more about your role to help them get an idea of what to actually do whenever something happens. So yeah, basically playbook is a set of instructions. And honestly, it is a little sad to say that the country doesn't have a playbook for cybersecurity incidents right now, or how to respond to them, but obviously you have to start somewhere, and I'm really glad that this is something that the country is really putting at the front, because honestly the next few years more and more sophisticated cybersecurity attacks are going to occur no matter what, and no matter how much we try to prevent them, because there's always going to be a hole in some company, in some government entity somewhere, and all it takes is just one foot in the door in some system, one set of privilege escalation somewhere, and then basically access to entire company or system that may spread potentially to other companies and other systems. And that is why cybersecurity is so important, and why you guys should all decide to have a career in cybersecurity. I'm just kidding, only if you want to. But yeah, those are kind of like the high level main things that I thought were really important from the executive order. Now, of course, this is all the aftermath right now, and who knows what's going to happen a few days from now. Maybe more information will be released by Colonial Pipeline. Obviously, we are dying to know how they got into the system, or how Darkside got into the system specifically, how they were able to spread. They did share a little bit about the data and the operation side that didn't have a separation of duties or some kind of firewall controls deployed to prevent data from flowing in and out. However, we don't really have the details exactly on how that happened. So yeah, I have been rambling a lot. I don't even know how long this video is going to be, but please let me know if you like this kind of video and kind of like storytelling, but also like reading a lot of news. I do have a Feedly where I basically read a lot of these articles, which is basically like an RSS for all of these cybersecurity blogs that I read. So I would love to do more of these videos if you guys are interested in these and kind of learning more about like what's in the cybersecurity news and upcoming hacks and attacks. Of course, this was a really big one which affected basically the whole East Coast of the country. But yeah, I would love to hear you guys' feedback, and it's definitely a really good learning process, because if you're asked about it in an interview, most people should expect you to know this, especially when it comes to the big hacks like SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline. So yeah, definitely great to keep these in the back of your pocket or the back of your mind for potential future interviews. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys liked it. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe and turn on post notifications if you did. Definitely leave your feedback below. I would love to hear it, as well as what you think about the attack, because I do think this is a great discussion point, because I know that I'm going to be hearing about this attack a lot just going into meetings with my coworkers and my teammates, because we love discussing these attacks, especially on team calls and stuff like that. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!